Hello, my name is Dr. Finian Fallon. I'm a psychologist and psychotherapist here in Dublin. In this video I'll be speaking with Dr. Mali Coyne. Mali is a clinical psychologist and lecturer at NUI Galway. In the first of three interviews with Mali, we'll be discussing issues related to childcare and the crisis. In the first video of the three, Dr. Mali will be talking about issues related to attachment and separation and what this means and how this might play out in the context of the current situation. Thank you. So Mari, thanks very much for joining us. So this is, as you know, part of a series we're doing for frontline workers in relation to the COVID-19 crisis. And we've been talking about the issues related to children and their welfare and their parents and their welfare in terms of minding their children, etc. So a few questions we can go through and see if it can be helpful to people in terms of the period during the pandemic. So the first video we're recording is about attachment, and it's a term we hear a lot about, and I suppose related to that at the moment is the issue of parents and children being separated for whatever reason due to the crisis. Can you tell us a bit more about attachment?
Well, I suppose attachment is really babies are hardwired from birth to develop a bond with their caregiver, and it's usually their parent, their mum and their dad, or whoever is looking after them. And we're hardwired to do that. It's a very biological thing from birth. And it's a really important survival thing from birth mechanism from birth, because it kind of guarantees that the baby is going to be looked after well by their parents in a way. And so attachment really is all about the parent being able to tune in to the child's needs from the time they're a baby all the way up into their lives when they're grown up. And it's about the parent's ability to comfort the baby or the child when they're upset, and to share in joyful experiences. And also, I suppose, children really learn who they are by how they're responded to by their parents. So it's a really, really important kind of concept in psychology that kind of guides a lot of the way that I work, and I'm sure the way you work. And it's just, and I suppose it all comes from Bowlby's attachment theory back in the 1950s.
Yeah.
And really everything comes from that. And if the baby has a secure attachment from birth, and the first 3 years are really important in terms of brain pathways, then they kind of have found in studies that there will be kind of better outcomes for that baby and that child throughout their lives in all aspects of their lives. But I always say that there's always time to rebuild and to repair attachment if a parent feels like things weren't the way they would have liked it to be when their babies were born.
Okay, great. So in terms of development processes, it's very important. The early years are very important for children. We were talking about before the idea that in clinical presentations we often meet clients who have maybe early breaches in attachment, early separations, if you like. Can you tell us a bit how a child's sense of security can be impacted by these separations and breaks?
I think it's important to know that attachment is a third, the parent tuning in to the child. It's a third rupture. And when psychologists talk about rupture, we're not talking about like a rupture that's permanent. We're talking about even like a temporary rupture, which can be like what you described there, separations. You know, when your child goes to preschool every day or goes to school, in a way that is a break from you and your attachment. And then a third of secure attachment is all about repair. So when there is a rupture, and the rupture can, by the way, also be caused by when you are a parent and you are full up and you are quite overwhelmed as a parent, that sometimes you don't react in the way that you would have liked to have reacted to your child. And this happens, by the way, in every home, and it's happening in every home now as we speak. But then it's all about, a third of it is all about the repair of the rupture, which is the coming back together of the parent and the child, be it after separation or be it they've had a row, and the parent, I suppose, is the one really in charge of trying to repair that in a way that's not reblaming the child for what's happened, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. And I suppose the good news is that most repairs are repairable, or most ruptures rather are repairable.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that children, I suppose, I always talk about good enough parenting, and children only need good enough. And I think what this crisis is really teaching us is that children actually need a lot less than we might have thought they needed.
Yeah, they're
Do you
very
know?
resilient. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
How can frontline parents help their children understand the crisis and the challenges that are faced in this time?
I think it's because it's an ever-changing situation. It's a difficult one. What I always say to parents before they check in with their kids about what's happening, particularly for frontline parents, I would say is to check in with yourself first about how you're feeling before you have conversations like that. So I would suggest that if you're very stressed or tired in a moment or don't feel very supported yourself, it's probably not the best time to be having a conversation with your child about what's going on in your job or what's going on, to do with the coronavirus. There are some beautiful resources out there that I've put on my website as well, and lots out there just about how to explain. There's lots of lovely storybooks of how to explain the coronavirus to kids depending on their ages. But I think the most important thing is to try to be calm if you can when you're talking about it. Try to share in an age appropriate way. I don't think young children need to know about, how many people are dying every day from the coronavirus. It's certainly, I have a 6 and an 8-year old, and it's certainly not something that I would be sharing with them on a daily basis. How many new people caught it? All the figures we're hearing every day. I don't think children need to know that. Young children don't anyway. So I suppose in an age appropriate way, and also to answer their questions. But if you don't have the answer to a particular question in a moment, you can say to them, that's a really good question, and I'm just going to have a wee think about that and come back to you. If you've been caught kind of, on the hop and you don't exactly know how you're going to answer that. So I think those things are really important. Checking in with yourself, trying to be calm and reassuring if you can, and try to provide age appropriate information depending on the age of your child.
So, what practical ways can frontline parents nurture their attachment with their children and also keep the bond strong with the children during times of self isolation or separation?
Yeah, I mean, it is a hard one. Like every frontline parent will have a unique situation in terms of some will be coming home from work and they're still, in like in the family unit, and there isn't self isolation going on. And then there's other parents who mightn't be able to kind of live with their children at the moment, or they might be in a situation like that. And I think it's really important for parents to know that just because there's separation, or the parent, might be busier at the moment with their job, where their balance has kind of shifted a bit more towards their job rather than home life, to know that the attachment bond that you have created up to now is going to see you through. Do you know what I mean? There's a lovely book out there called The Invisible String, and it basically talks about this lovely idea of there being a string that's between you and your child. And when your child goes into school, that string is still very much intact. When you think about your child, that string is very much there. So I think the most important thing is to really continue the contact with your child as much as you can. And if you can't actually touch them or hug them, which I really hope you can, but if that's presenting as not a healthy thing for yourselves at the moment in your current situation, to let them know how much you love them, and to let them know how much you care about them, and how much you hold them in mind. Holding a child in mind is a really important part of keeping that attachment going. I think try, if you can, if you're a frontline parent, when you go home, that it becomes your like little cocoon. I know we're talking about cocooning a lot at the moment, but it's your own little safe home unit if you are at home, that you try to keep work at work and home at home. And if you can, have moments of delight and play with your children, if you can. And I'm not saying put loads of pressure on yourself to do that, but engage with them, delight in them. Children really, really love when their parents notice something that they've done that's really, something that they've read, or something that they've, a picture that they've drawn. So try to spend a little bit of quality time with them. But I suppose, and if you can't do it face to face or close by, to be having the contact, on the phone, online, as much as you can. and just kind of connecting with them, really connecting with them, delighting in them, comforting them when they're in distress, being their parent, but knowing that the attachment that you have built from the time they were born to now is going to see you through, and that this is, as you said, Finian, at every time you finish your lovely talks, is that this too shall pass.
That's right, yeah, absolutely. I really like this image of the invisible string.
Yeah.
And even as a visualization for parents, I think that's a great thing for parents to maybe give themselves a bit of relief or respite from their work, is just to remember that invisible string, the connection.
Yeah.
But also, I like what you're saying about keeping the boundary between work and home life is very important, because it can become one big sort of kind of confusing mess for people in some respects if they're not able to separate. And also, I'd add, I think it's great for parents if they can play like children and get a break, get a respite from their work as well, and get a break from their work as well, and take in the good of that as well. Absolutely. If there was one sort of summary sort of idea or a sentence you could offer parents, frontline parents, in relation to attachment and separation, what might that be?
I think it would be to take the pressure off yourself and to be a good enough parent. A good enough parent is a parent who is there and has quality time with their children, but also considers their own needs as being hugely important, because they can't pour from an empty cup. And I think that's a really important message, and that this will pass, and that your attachment from all of these years will see you through.
Great. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
So, some great tips and ideas there to think about in relation to separation and attachment for frontline workers and childcare issues that you may be having. Thank you for listening, and thanks again to Dr. Mally Coyne.